Okay, let's unpack. We are diving deep into the final act of one of the biggest, most defining television shows of the conclusion of Stranger Things. This wasn't just another season finale. This was, the narrative equivalent of a moon landing.
Right.
The grand conclusion that was meant to stick the landing, unify a massive global fandom, and really just cement the show's legacy forever.
Instead, what we saw was a finish line crossed with just widespread confusion and, frankly, dissatisfaction. And what's so fascinating here is that the sources you gathered, they aren't just like subjective critiques of the plot points.
Oh, not at all.
They are a forensic analysis of the reaction to the official behind-the-scenes documentary that chronicled the making of the final season.
Exactly. Our listeners shared transcripts and critical breakdowns because these documents, they reveal the alleged, almost unbelievable internal chaos. I mean, the utter lack of structural preparation and the ignored creative advice that many argue doomed the series. That documentary, which was supposed to be a celebratory look at artistic creation, inadvertently became, as one of the sources strikingly put it, ammunition for critics and disappointed fans.
It's a textbook example of how radical transparency can, expose fundamental systemic flaw. When the curtain is pulled back, the audience suddenly realizes that the creative authority making the decisions was arguably deeply compromised.
And that's our mission today. We're here to analyze these damning pieces of evidence to understand how a cultural phenomenon with this kind of budget, this level of creative control, and this pedigree went so completely off the rails when it mattered.
And this analysis, it isn't just about reviewing a TV show. It's about evaluating the pressure cooker environment of modern mega franchise creation. It's a perfect case study in how production deadlines and business aspirations can lead to creative atrophy.
Where the focus shifts.
Yeah, the focus shifts entirely from storytelling integrity to just ticking boxes.
And for you, the listener, understanding this process, it helps you distinguish between legitimate creative choices and choices born out of, logistical failure. When a narrative feels rushed or nonsensical, often the reason lies not in the fictional world.
No, it's in the real-world scheduling and decision-making process.
And the most immediate, visceral shock factor that kicked off this entire wave of criticism was the almost unbelievable admission from the creators themselves, the Duffer brothers.
Oh, oui.
They allegedly confirmed in the documentary that they did not have the final, crucial episode 8, written and locked before production even started.
It's just wild.
Plus, there was the immediate and equally shocking visual evidence suggesting a reliance on external tools, with accusations floating around that they may have been using things like ChatGPT just to keep pace.
That admission speaks to an incredible level of organizational failure and unpreparedness, especially considering the enormous budget and, the decade-long history of the show.
Right.
For the finale of a globally significant series to enter physical production without a finished script is, frankly, baffling. It just set the stage for all the structural compromises we ultimately witnessed.
Okay, let's start with that central piece of evidence from the documentary. Core revelation that just instantly undermined the integrity of the showrunners' entire process.
They made an almost casual admission describing a kind of high-wire act of production management. They openly stated that they went into production without having a finished script for the finale, episode 8.
And they tried to normalize it.
They did. Their attempt to normalize this chaotic process was encapsulated in that highly quotable phrase. They were laying down the tracks as the train is going.
Laying down the tracks as the train is going. You hear that, and you immediately picture a scenario that is less about meticulous storytelling and more about pure, frantic disaster management.
Absolutely.
For any other television show, especially one operating on a tight weekly broadcast schedule, this would be catastrophic. But for the finale of a decade-long saga, it implies an almost reckless disregard for the fundamental structure of the narrative.
And that phrase, it just quickly became shorthand for the production's operational risk. We're talking about the finale, the part that demands the tightest narrative logic, the most precise character beats, and the largest spectacle.
Yeah.
When you're improvising those tracks, every single creative decision runs the risk of collapsing the entire structure.
And the sources highlight that this wasn't just a Duffer Brothers secret. I mean, the transcripts show the sheer panic and disbelief among the writing staff and the crew. They mention a specific writer stating, with palpable distress, "I've never read 8 through. We're shooting it.
Wow.
We're shooting it."
That quote suggests that not only was the script unfinished, but the creative team responsible for executing the vision, the directors, the actors, the production designers, they were proceeding completely blind.
They had no idea.
No idea of the overall thematic or plot resolution. When you have key creative personnel saying they haven't read the ending, it tells you that the integrity of the continuity and the emotional arcs is immediately at risk.
How could it not be?
If the writer responsible for a character doesn't know where that character ends up, how can they accurately write their trajectory in episodes 6 and 7? It forces the production to operate on faith, not on a coherent plan.
So, okay, given how serious the situation was, what was their justification? The Duffer brothers offered claiming they faced the most difficult writing circumstance we've ever found ourselves.
Right. They pointed fingers.
They did. They pointed fingers at external forces, citing pressure from Netflix and overwhelming demands from production, claiming they were hammered to deliver episode 8.
And this is where the critical thinking becomes so essential, particularly for you, the listener. While production pressure is absolutely a grinding reality in Hollywood, the core critique in the source material pushes back hard on you.
Very hard. The counter-argument is powerful. This show is a global cash cow. If you've had a decade to establish the rules, the characters, and the broad strokes of the conclusion, the time crunch for episode 8 should have been managed.
Exact. The source material suggests the failure wasn't due to the lack of time to write episode 8, but the fundamental lack of a clear, comprehensive, final structural plan.
A plan that should have been solidified years
ago. They had a decade to figure out the landing, and the rush indicates not just a deadline issue, but a systemic failure to prioritize the narrative architecture.
It frames the whole defense of "we were under pressure" as a deflection from accountability.
It does. When you have years of runway, the responsibility shifts from "we ran out of time" to "we failed to use the time we had to secure the core structural integrity of the finale." It implies a creative miscalculation where the production timeline was allowed to dictate the storytelling,
rather than the storytelling dictating the timeline.
Precisely.
And this lack of a narrative blueprint brings us directly to the structural complaints about the finale itself. The sources repeatedly argue that episode 8, the supposed grand conclusion, is just inadequate, rushed, and severely lacking the scale that was expected after a 10-year investment from the audience.
And the criticism is highly sophisticated. It's focusing on the principles of dramatic pacing and denouement. The source contends that episode 8 felt like it was only partly wrapping it up.
Only partly.
Yeah. If the show was building toward a massive, universe-altering final battle, common trope in modern blockbuster franchise, that conflict cannot be compressed into the final hour of one episode.
The structural argument presented in the analysis is that the final confrontation should have been granted the narrative space, maybe spanning episodes 6, 7, and 8.
Or, alternatively, that the entire second half of the season should have been one massive, sustained, escalating conflict that required all of the characters to finally execute their decade-long arc. By compressing it, the show just suffered from structural atrophy.
And this structural misdirection connects immediately to the fan expectation regarding the budget. I mean, the audience was fully aware of the massive per-episode costs.
Oh, yeah.
Which led to this implicit promise that the financial resources were being saved for an incredibly expensive Avengers Endgame type thing for the finale.
And when the payoff finally arrived, and it didn't feel protracted or overwhelming or deeply consequential enough to justify the compressed seating episode, the disappointment was amplified.
It felt like a failure to meet the audience's financial expectations as much as their narrative one. The money was visibly spent, but not in a way that served the ultimate payoff.
You know, you, the listener, you invested time and emotion series, and the ultimate reward for that investment should have been an earned, powerful conclusion. Instead, the documentary revealed a process that confirmed the story had to be disappointing.
Because the architects hadn't finished the blueprint.
Right? Forcing compromises on scale and pacing. It just reinforces the idea that complex, massive, serialized storytelling cannot sustain this level of operational chaos. The narrative denouement must be treated as sacred, not as an afterthought to be completed under fire.
Which is a perfect segue. This is where the story shifts from logistical failure to alleged creative insulation. The documentary footage, particularly as analyzed in various TikTok comments, suggested that the staff and even the stars knew more about Stranger Things than the Duffer brothers.
Yeah, that's a big claim.
And that they actively tried to correct their course or pose crucial foundational character and plot questions, only to have their input allegedly.
This specific point is, in many ways, the most damning indictment. It suggests that the core creative authority disregarded the expertise of the very people they hired.
People who, operating closer to the material on a daily basis, clearly understood the show's established DNA and its fan base's expectation far better. We have a prime tangible example of this regarding the monster problem in the climactic battle. Writer Paul Dichter made a suggestion that was not only narratively sensible, but emotionally He suggested there should be more monsters in the finale, specifically recommending the return of the original Demogorgon.
Which makes perfect.
It's the creature that opened the Upside Down and started the entire conflict.
Bringing back the original threat in the final fight is classic franchise story. It provides a powerful sense of narrative symmetry, completing a cycle that began a decade ago, and it raises the stakes by showing the full, historical, and evolving threat the heroes face. It connects the past, present, and future of the upside-down confrontation.
But the reported Duffer response was just a flat rejection. The idea was allegedly shot down due to Demogorgon fatigue.
Demogorgon fatigue. That dismissal is so indicative of a creative team that may have become disconnected from its own foundational mythology, confuse their own internal weariness with what the audience actually wanted.
Right.
The source points out that a major criticism of the finale was that the threat felt too singular and abstract with Vecna's giant spider manifestation.
By rejecting the Demogorgon on the basis of fatigue, they failed to capitalize on the enormous nostalgic and narrative payoff that reintroducing a classic threat would have provided. They needed a moment where the full weight of the past crashed into the present.
And the Demogorgon was the physical embodiment of that. And look, they had ample opportunity to make the Demogorgon fresh. Imagine a sequence where the original monster, which the characters understand and fear intimately, is unleashed alongside Vecna's newer, more psychological threats.
That would have been amazing.
By ignoring this specific, well-thought-out suggestion from their own writer, they sacrificed spectacle and emotional resonance for what felt like an arbitrary desire for novelty.
This alleged pattern of the core creative authority overriding better judgment, even from within their own rank, is so compellingly familiar that the sources immediately drew a parallel to a classic cautionary tale in blockbuster documentary.
The behind-the-scenes look at The Phantom Menace.
Exactly.
It's a really skewed comparison. The Phantom Menace documentary, while ostensibly promoting the film, famously showed George Lucas making highly questionable decisions against the clear advice of his staff.
Like the casting choice.
Yeah, casting choices like Jake Lloyd for Anakin or the development of Jar Binks' voice and mannerism. In that case, the documentary exposed an insulated creative authority operating without the necessary checks and balance.
And the analysis here is sharp. The transparency of the documentary, in both cases, doesn't just critique the final product, it exposes the flawed process of an overly confident auteur. It shows the audience that the ultimate decision makers went against the better instincts of their highly paid staff,
resulting in a product that felt deeply compromised and lacking critical self-awareness. The real problem isn't that the Duffer brothers made a single bad call, because all creators do. The problem is that the documentary showcased a dynamic where strong, narratively superior suggestions were apparently available and yet explicitly rejected.
Maybe due to sheer creative exhaustion or, more cynically, distraction.
Right.
And this leads us to the most difficult accusation contained within the paycheck perception. The critique suggests that the Duffer brothers' commitment to the artistic success of the finale waned in comparison to their focus on their next massive commercial venture.
The implication being that they began viewing the show as merely a stepping stone, a paycheck that needed to be collected quickly so they could move on.
This is where the inherent business pressure of a massive media company creates a profound, potentially perverse incentive. The sources highlight that the showrunners were allegedly actively working on a Paramount deal during the most critical final writing stages for the finale.
The timing of that focus is explosive when you layer it against the backdrop of the laying down tracks chaos.
It is. If your primary focus, while attempting to finish the biggest project of your career, is securing the next multi-million-dollar contract, it certainly suggests a major shift in priority.
You're focusing on future opportunity rather than ensuring the successful, satisfying completion of the current one. This is a classic conflict between artistic integrity and financial opportunity. When you're finalizing a deal of that magnitude, the negotiation and planning require immense mental bandwidth.
And to conduct that at the same time as the delicate, high-pressure process of writing a series finale, it's a recipe for catastrophic distraction.
The source even used a very accessible analogy for you, the listener, regarding financial responsibility. When you are in the process of securing a major financial loan, like a mortgage, you are advised against taking on any other major debt until that initial loan clears.
Right.
The implication here is a creative caveat. You don't compromise the artistic integrity and resolution of the show that made you famous by focusing on your next multi-million-dollar venture.
They essentially established a precedent, according to the source, that when faced with high pressure and massive opportunity, the jump to the next thing took precedence over the successful, high-quality completion of the current thing.
And so the documentary there didn't just show them writing poorly. It allegedly showed them distracted, prioritizing the business model over the narrative closure the fans were promised.
Moving now from the exposed process failure to the specific product failure, let's analyze the actual narrative choices that created dissonance and drove the fans toward frustration. The sources highlight several detours that felt arbitrary or, worse, fundamentally nonsensical in a final season that was just screaming for resolution.
The most frequently cited and perhaps structurally baffling example is the sudden elevation of the Holly Wheeler story. This character, whom the audience had barely registered, was previously defined by the source material as a background prop.
Mike's little sister, yeah. She was primarily used for brief, charming reaction shots in the background of family scenes.
Exactly.
And the critique is incredibly pointed, suggesting this plot point was pulled out of their ass. The distraction involved making Holly Wheeler a surprisingly central figure of the season, when the entire focus should have been meticulously wrapping up the decade-long arcs of the original core character.
Will, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, the adult figures, all of
them. And the cost of this detour in terms of structural integrity was immense. The source critique claims that Holly had more screen time in the final moments than most of the original cast.
Think about the opportunity cost, listeners. Every moment dedicated to a new, non-essential mystery surrounding Holly was a moment stolen from characters like Jonathan, whose arc felt completely unfinished, or Max, whose fate desperately needed focused resolution.
It contributes heavily to that overall feeling of narrative decompression and lack of focus. I mean, if you are, in fact, laying down the tracks as the train is going, it makes perfect sense that you might desperately veer off into less critical territory, like a Holly Wheeler detour.
Right. You're just looking for things to fill the time while the actual challenging, consequential ending is still being figured out. It feels like padding, not plotting.
And this structural looseness contributed directly to fundamental, unresolved mysteries that should have been clarified by the finale, especially when dealing with the mythology of the Upside Down. Let's look specifically at the logic underpinning the Season 4 killing.
Yes, the source notes the complete failure to explain the mechanical rationale behind Vecna going around randomly killing people. There was no clear, explicit explanation given for the necessity of these killings beyond just being.
If it was strictly about building power for the final gate, that should have been stated, timed, and visual.
In the supernatural narrative that tries to establish internal rule, like the necessity of specific keys or specific locations for gates' random actions, just dilute the menace and purpose of the villain.
And the Force points out that this lack of mechanical explanation extends to the final catastrophic event, which required Vecna to get 12 kids for no
reason. The critique argues there was no clear mathematical formula, no rational consequence established for this need. Why 12? Why not 10? Why not 100?
This is a universe that has always tried to ground its supernatural elements in quasi-scientific or specific mystical, like the relationship between Eleven's powers and the environment.
The lack of clear stakes and mechanism here just feels like a massive misstep. A simple rationale would have added immense weight and logic, as the source suggests. Imagine if the villain clearly stated, I need 4 people to open the gate, and then I need 12 people to bring the worlds together, because on November 6th, the time is right when the universe is insane.
That simple line of dialogue, or even a clear visual marker, would have instantly justified the timeline, explained the stakes, and made the killings feel essential, not arbitrary.
Instead, it comes across as arbitrary, as if the goalpost was simply moved to serve a dramatic moment without the audience ever understanding the foundational rules of the game.
And that kind of inconsistency, especially in a final season when the mythology should be tightening, fundamentally destroys audience trust and suspension.
And this vacuum of explanation, quality control, and structural logic naturally leads to high levels of fan speculation, which brings us to the infamous, highly speculative, but culturally significant fan theory that circulated widely hashtagged Divorcegate.
Divorcegate. And we must stress that this is firmly speculative content fandom, but its popularity is so indicative of satisfaction. The theory posits that one of the Duffer brothers' wives was an uncredited but instrumental collaborator responsible for acting as a crucial writing or sense-checking partner, providing continuity, oversight, and quality.
And the theory suggests that her absence, whatever the personal reasons, coincided precisely with the sudden and dramatic lack of quality control and the proliferation of those bizarre plot holes we just discussed.
While the truth of the personal lives of the creators is entirely irrelevant to our analysis, the fact that such a theory gained immediate and massive traction highlights a critical reality in collaborative.
The importance of the internal authoritative sense checker.
Yeah. The source mentions the perceived wincing of other writers in the room when bad ideas were proposed, suggesting a lack of decisive, final editorial authority that was.
This theory regardless of its truth, provides a simple, coherent narrative for the sudden drop in quality. It highlights the often invisible support system, whether it's a professional collaborator, a spouse, or an uncredited consultant, that ensure narrative coherence, particularly in complex, multi-layered narratives that span a decade.
And the vacuum left by the alleged departure of that crucial perspective is what the fans were trying to.
It speaks to the idea that complex writing requires not just an initial burst of talent, but sustained, rigorous peer review, challenge, and continuous quality control. Something the documentary arguably showed was either absent or just ignored by the ultimate decision makers.
No, perhaps the most profoundly painful part of the documentary was seeing tangible evidence of better, richer ideas that were left on the floor. Concepts revealed on a writer board that did not make the final cut. These were presented in the source material as far superior potential outcomes that were just inexplicably sacrificed.
The ability to peek at these whiteboard reveals is invaluable because they act as a literal window into the narrative choices that were made, and more importantly, discarded during that chaotic writing process. Let's look at some of the major scrapped concepts cited in the source material and analyze their superiority.
One concept, which would have provided a much-needed emotional beat, had Hopper fully aware of Eleven's fake-out, actively working behind the scenes for her return. This immediately adds layers of complexity and intention to his act, rather than just showing him grieving without knowledge.
And an early draft explored an alternate ending involving a tense moment where Max and Hopper exit a Hummer alone, with Mike panicking, while Eleven is seen on the other side of the rift. Crucially, the whiteboard contained a definitive note beside this concept. Eleven is gone, but not dead.
That specific phrase, 11 is gone but not dead, is incredibly revealing, particularly when you link it to the earlier paycheck. It strongly suggests that the original structural plan included a dramatic, deliberate narrative fake-out death for the central character.
And the source material draws a sharp conclusion here. This ambiguity was planned specifically to hedge commercial bets, paving the way for her inevitable return later, specifically when they need more money.
This frames the ending not as an organic, artistic conclusion, but as a commercial calculation. By ensuring the key IP asset, 11, is narratively available for future projects or sequels, the series avoids the finality that would satisfy an audience closure.
It prioritizes the viability of the franchise over the integrity of the narrative arc.
And even minor strokes found on the board made more sense than the final product. Another whiteboard note suggested that the military base was wiped.
Military was wiped out early, leaving the base effectively.
Right. And the source analysis notes that this would have made a lot more sense for the characters' infiltration and the overall logic of the plot, rather than the convoluted, half-hearted military presence we saw.
The consistent theme across all these scrapped ideas is a greater commitment to narrative consequence, dramatic intent, and linguistical clarity. They appeared to have richer, more dramatic beats that were ultimately sacrificed.
Maybe due to the time crunch, the loss of those internal checks and balances, or the necessity of maintaining future commercial viability.
And speaking of superior ending, the sources highlighted one specific fan-suggested ending that was widely circulated and viewed as far more satisfying and emotionally earned than the eventual rushed climax.
An idea that capitalized brilliantly on existing show lore.
This fan theory is superior because it provides a massive cathartic payoff for Will Byers, the character whose trauma and connection to the Upside Down define the first season. The setup is perfect. The characters are battling the mind flare and are completely overrun by a terrifying sight. 1,000 demogorgons converging on them. They prepare to die, believing all is lost.
And the genius twist that resolves the central conflict. The Demogorgons run right past the core group and instead attack the Mind Flayer because Will Byers, this character who has carried the psychic scar of the Upside Down for a decade, is controlling.
Having stayed behind and finally mastering his connection to the dark dimension, this utilizes the exact long-established connection to the Upside Down that the show failed to resolve or leverage in the actual finale. It finally elevates Will from a victim of the Mind Flayer to a master of the Upside Down's forces.
It completes his hero's journey.
It does. And it also provides that beautiful, powerful emotional arc for Dustin and Steve, delivering on the desired you die, I die moment of protective sacrifice and closure.
That alternative moment would have delivered genuine scale, complex character resolution, and a shocking lore-based reversal of expectations. Everything the actual rushed finale desperately lacked.
Right.
It makes the final product feel even weaker when you see the potential that was right there using threads the show itself had already established.
It just reinforces the argument that the fundamental problem was poor execution, structural failure, and a mismanaged focus, not a lack of conceptual creativity. The writers, the staff, and crucially the audience clearly understood what was necessary for a satisfying conclusion. The showrunners, allegedly distracted and pressured, simply missed the mark.
And finally, we have to revisit the small but symbolically huge elephant in the writer's room.
Well.
The AI controversy and the subsequent damage control efforts. Fans were speculating wildly based on pausing the documentary footage that the Duffer brothers were using generative AI tools like ChatGPT or consulting crowdsourced ideas via Reddit tabs for writing it.
The source material confirms the visual evidence was highly scrutinized. While the Reddit logo was apparently clear, suggesting a reliance on crowdsourced ideas, the speculation about a ChatGPT tab was more ambiguous, though visually present in one frame. Regardless of whether it was actually ChatGPT or just Google Docs, the implication was clear.
A perceived lack of original, focused inspiration, or perhaps an over-reliance on external tools to meet the relentless deadline.
And when the documentary director, Martina Radman, was asked directly about the use of ChatGPT, the response was rapid and evasive, classic damage control. She sidestepped the question entirely, suggesting that such tabs might just be used for a simple search engine or quick fact-checking.
But the critical analysis found in the source material provides the perfect, devastating counterpoint to that damage control effort. The critique summed it up in one sharp, bitter joke.
If they had used ChatGPT,
it would have been better and it would have been done.
Wow.
That single, cynical statement just encapsulates the depth of the creative failure. It is a damning joke, suggesting that even a large language model, fed the core lore, character arcs, and narrative structure of seasons 1 through 4, could have generated an outline that resulted in a more logically sound, more satisfying, and crucially finished script than the rushed, compromised product the human creators actually delivered.
It fundamentally challenges the romantic notion that human creativity, especially under extreme duress, automatically trumps algorithmic synthesis, particularly when the human creators are allegedly distracted by massive outside commercial deals that fracture their focus.
The machine perhaps had a clearer memory of the show's original promise than the ship.
So, to synthesize this entire deep dive, what the documentary inadvertently revealed is that the failure of the finale stemmed less from an intrinsic shortage of good ideas, as the whiteboard reveals, the Demogorgon suggestion, and the fan theories proved, and more from a fatal combination of operational chaos,
overwhelming production pressure,
an alleged lack of commitment to artistic details, the paycheck theory, and a critical failure to listen to internal expertise. The documentary turned a planned celebration into the definitive evidence of systemic failure.
And the real consequence of this chaos is profound and lasting. The disappointing ending retroactively ruins the fandom for the entire series. When the conclusion fails this spectacular, it doesn't just disappoint. It casts a long, dark shadow that diminishes the memory and legacy of all the fantastic.
Yeah, the narrative weight of that ending forces a reevaluation of the entire journey. And while some dedicated fans may choose to ignore the final outcome, just as some devoted fans ignore the Disney Star Wars sequel trilogy in favor of the original saga, the failure to stick the landing fundamentally jeopardizes the show's legacy for new generations discovering the series.
It shifts the discussion from one of genius world building to a cautionary tale about creative burnout and the corrupting pitfalls of massive commercial success. So we circle back to the central character who represents the show's future 11. The documentary director, Martina Radman, ultimately deferred, saying Eleven's ultimate fate is vaguely up to the audience.
Right. And we know the whiteboard showed clear plans for her to be gone but not dead.
Which raises our final provocative thought for you to mull over as you consider the future of franchise television.
What does it truly mean for a major franchise to leave its most critical character's ultimate fate deliberately ambiguous, not for artistic depth, not to preserve a profound mystery, but purely for commercial possibility? Does prioritizing the potential next paycheck, the ability to revive the character for a spin-off, a movie, or another sequel, fundamentally compromise the artistic and emotional need for a satisfying, definitive narrative conclusion? If the pursuit of perpetual profit always outweighs finality, how much creative integrity can any mega franchise truly maintain?